Jasmine Crockett and the survivor who stepped forward for the first time didn't plan to shake the entire political world in one afternoon. But that's exactly what happened. The moment their names were spoken in the same breath, one a lawmaker determined to expose the truth, the other a woman carrying decades of silence, the room shifted. Because this wasn't just another hearing, another speech, or another round of political theater. This was the first crack in a wall that powerful people spent years trying to cement shut. And in the first 30 seconds, everyone watching felt the same thing.
Thank you so much. And first of all, let me just say that we are standing before you. We're having this conversation because of the oversight Democratic leadership. And so I want to reiterate that it's the Democratic leadership on oversight that has truly been able to move this forward. I'm sure many of you don't recall, but we were sent home early to try to avoid being able to take a vote on something like getting these files. We are about doing real transparency. We don't care who's in the files. We are going after you. So if I had to sum up what happened today, we heard the stories of victims, and honestly, we heard the story of at least one person that has never come forward before today. This was the very first time that she was telling anyone in a semi-public way her story. And if I had to summarize the theme, I would say that their theme was to do something. It is probably the theme of the American people in general right now when it comes to government, is that they want us to do something. So yes, we have the roundtable, but they actually want to see some action. The fact that this started off in the 90s, and we had someone who could talk about what happened to them in the 90s. But then you go down the line and you've got somebody that's telling us their story from 2008. These failures led to years and years of abuse that did not have to take place. And so the reality is this. Some think that this is all over and some think that nothing else is going on. But if there was ever a RICO case, it would have been the Epstein case. So how we went from something that should have been RICO because of how sophisticated of a system this was, and this wasn't just one little sick old man that was doing stuff, but there were so many layers, whether we're talking about the banks that were involved, whether we're talking about those that worked for him, that helped him, whether we're talking about the monster known as Maxwell, and that's exactly how y'all need to refer to her. She is a monster. She is not a victim. So let me tell you, I want some action items to come out of this because for once we somewhat look like we're bipartisan in the Oversight Committee. Number one, we need answers. We need answers on why it is that Maxwell was transferred from her current station or her former station in Florida down to Texas. We need to have an understanding because everything that I heard today leads me to know that for sure she was all up and in and through this entire process, not to mention that she was indicted by a jury of her peers and then she was tried and convicted and given 20 years. So why is it that we had somebody, again, it almost seems like we are doomed to repeat our failures, because why is it we have high-level people that seemingly are running cover for a criminal? And that is what she is. She is a monster and she is a criminal. So number one, we need answers on what happened with that transfer, why it took place. And honestly, we all need to stand together and say that Maxwell needs to go back to where the monsters go, which is to a higher level of security. We also need to understand that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has legislation that she has been trying to push forward. And so in a bipartisan way, we all need to get behind Debbie, because we found and what we learned is that there were loopholes as it relates to the Crime Victims Act. And so we've got to make sure that no other victims suffer in the way that they did when you have somebody like Alex Acosta that decides that he wants to play games and dismiss a case and never inform the victims of what's going on as is required by law. So we are going to have to fix those loopholes to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it took them 10 years of fighting this, and ultimately by the time they got to the end of it, well, it also was Jeffrey Epstein's end, and so there was not a resolution for that. And the final thing that I think that we need to do is, obviously, we need to continue to push forward and make sure that we get all the files, because we know that we have not received them all. Because I am standing in front of the press, I'm also going to make a plea. one of the things that I realized was that there's a lot of stuff that the DOJ may have, but honestly, if you don't have a thorough investigation, and I can't say if we had a thorough investigation or not, we have no idea. But the reality is that when you have investigators that go out, they go out and they collect information. I am not necessarily convinced that they even have gone out and done their due diligence to fully investigate this case in the first place. So if there's anyone in the public that believes that you have information that would be valuable, you've never been able to get through to federal agencies, or no one would listen to you when you try to go forward and bring information forward, I am asking that you trust oversight DIMS and you bring that information to us. Or if you know where some information is contained, let us know so that we can then send subpoenas out that way. We want to do right not only by those that have already suffered under Epstein, but we want to prevent other trafficking rings that we know are out there. We want to make sure that we are doing right for future generations. So with that, I now have the honor of presenting to you the firecracker out of New Mexico.
Something was finally breaking loose when this survivor, unknown, unheard, never before willing to speak in any semi-public setting, stepped forward. The air changed. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried the weight of everything that had been hidden since the 90s, everything that money, connections, and carefully crafted legal deals had buried. For decades, stories like hers existed in whispers, in sealed files, behind settlements, beneath the surface of a case that never truly closed. But this time, it wasn't a rumor or a leak or a second-hand account. It was a real person, looking directly at a government committee, deciding that silence had gone on long enough, and the first person to speak after her wasn't interested in polite applause or empty acknowledgments. Jasmine Crockett walked into that moment with fire in her voice and steel in her spine. She didn't downplay the survivor's courage. She amplified it. She used it to expose the uncomfortable truth about what this case has always been. Not a scandal about a single man, but a blueprint of how power protects itself. Crockett didn't start with vague comments or soft political language. She started by revealing something most people watching had no idea about. Congress had once been sent home early specifically to avoid voting on releasing the Epstein files. She laid it out plainly. Oversight Democrats forced this investigation forward while others tried to shut it down. And she wasn't shy about what that meant. "We don't care who's in the files," she said. "We're going after you." For a system where accountability often dies the moment a name becomes inconvenient, that was a warning shot. But Crockett didn't stop at politics. She pulled the lens back to show the entire structure behind Epstein. And this is where the story becomes something bigger, something most people never hear in mainstream coverage. She said the quiet part out loud. If there was ever a case that fit the definition of organized, layered, coordinated wrongdoing, it was this one. A case with financial channels, insiders, facilitators, silent partners, and people who knew enough to stop it, but didn't. She compared it to a RICO-level operation, not alleging new crimes, but highlighting how deep and interconnected the whole network appeared to be. She talked about banks rumored to have moved money, employees who handled logistics, associates who looked the other way, and at the center of the enabling machinery, the woman she refused to call anything but a monster, Ghislaine Maxwell. Crockett didn't soften her language. She didn't hint that Maxwell was some manipulated figure. She reminded everyone what the jury already decided. Maxwell was convicted, sentenced, and deeply involved. And yet, somehow, mysteriously, she was transferred to a lower security facility. Crockett demanded to know why. That question hit harder than people expected because Maxwell's transfer didn't align with the gravity of her crimes or the level of risk she represented. Crockett wasn't making accusations. She was asking the questions the public had been asking online for months. Why was Maxwell moved? Who authorized it? What justification was given? And why did it feel like the system was repeating the same patterns that allowed Epstein to operate for years? The shift in security wasn't the only issue. Crockett connected it to a larger failure, one that started long before Epstein's final arrest. She highlighted how loopholes in the Crime Victims Act were exploited to cut secret deals behind closed doors. Deals that let prosecutors like Alex Acosta dismiss major charges without telling the victims, even though the law required it. Crockett wasn't rewriting history. She was showing the audience how that history still shaped the present. Those loopholes weren't ancient statutes. They were still in place, still affecting cases today, still exposing victims to the same failures, the same silence, the same legal gymnastics that once kept Epstein safe from real accountability. That's why she pushed for bipartisan support of Debbie Wasserman Schultz's legislation to fix those loopholes. Not because it would clean up old mistakes, but because it could prevent the next predator with powerful friends from slipping through the cracks. In Crockett's eyes, this wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about stopping the future from repeating it. Then she dropped the part that made the room go still. Congress still doesn't have all the Epstein files. Let that sink in. After years of investigations, years of hearings, years of public interest, there are still missing documents, still sealed records, still material the committee hasn't received. Crockett didn't say the DOJ was hiding anything. She didn't accuse investigators of wrongdoing. But she said something that resonated with everyone who's been following the case online. I'm not convinced they've even done a full investigation. It wasn't a claim, it was a concern. And it was one shared by millions of people who have watched for years as files appeared, disappeared, leaked, and reappeared on the internet like puzzle pieces someone keeps trying to rearrange. Then Crockett did something almost no lawmaker ever does. She went outside the government. She asked the public for help. She urged anyone with credible information, documents, tips, locations of stored material, anything, to bring it directly to oversight Democrats if agencies had ignored them. She wasn't inviting conspiracies. She was acknowledging a truth the hearing made clear. Institutions fail when power gets involved. And sometimes the only way forward is through people who refuse to let evidence die in silence. Her message wasn't partisan. It was protective. She said the committee looked more bipartisan today than ever before, and that transparency should be the one thing every political party agrees on. If the system failed these women for decades, the least the government could do now was refuse to let another generation be swallowed by the same darkness. But what made the moment unforgettable wasn't the political tone. It was the emotional truth behind it. Crockett wasn't defending a party. She was defending the powerless, the ones ignored, the ones who waited too long for justice, the ones who finally saw a chance to be heard. That's why she kept circling back to the survivor who spoke for the first time. Because that woman didn't just share her trauma. She opened a window into a system that repeatedly chose convenience and reputation over human lives. Crockett knew that moment had to be honored. The survivors weren't there to relive pain. They were there to demand action, real action. And Crockett promised it. Her framing turned the hearing from a news clip into a moral test. Can a government that once failed these survivors now hold itself accountable? Can a justice system that protected the powerful finally protect the powerless? Can institutions built on secrecy learn to prioritize transparency? The survivor's voice was the spark. Crockett's response was the flame. Together, they formed a message bigger than the hearing. This investigation is not over. The files are not fully released. The questions are not answered. The legislation is not fixed. The networks that once enabled Epstein are not fully exposed. And the only way anything changes is if the public refuses to let the pressure fade away. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that silence is the most valuable tool in any system built to shield the powerful. And if this moment proves anything, it's that silence is finally breaking. That's what made this hearing different. It wasn't just a summary of events. It was a turning point. A survivor reclaimed her voice. A lawmaker demanded answers. A network of failures was exposed. And the public was reminded that justice doesn't move unless someone pushes it.so. If you're watching this, remember, these stories don't stay alive on their own. They stay alive because people refuse to look away, because people demand answers, because people insist that power be held accountable, no matter how long it takes. And that's exactly why this channel exists, to keep the pressure on, to keep these stories visible, and to shine light where powerful people hope you're not looking. If you want more deep dive breakdowns like this, stories that matter, stories that expose what others try to hide, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and stay engaged. Your voice, your attention, your pressure, it all matters. And together, we'll make sure these stories never get buried again.